views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, your landlord has a responsibility to maintain the building as to prevent any injuries that may occur, but so many do not. Today we sit down with an expert to help navigate the area of law known as premises liability. Next up, do you advertise on social media? Did you know there are rules and regulations that govern the industry? We have an expert in studio who will make sure you know the proper way to advertise your business. And finally, are you interested in expanding your family through adoption? Well, we hope so. But before you do, there are many legal issues you should become familiar with. We bring you up to speed with an attorney on set. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Hello, welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us at Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at bronxnet.tv. Property owners owe tenants and their guests a duty to protect from injury, but what does that really entail? Well, here to discuss all things relating to premises liability is attorney Louis Grandelli. Louis, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, David.
Louis, since we're talking about property issues and property liability with respect to landlords, we were talking a little bit offset, and I want to really get into it, a little bit about property owners that owe you a duty and have actually videotaped some portion of their building. And that's really what makes a case. Am I correct?
Well, the profession has changed as it relates to premises liability case in the respect that there's so many surveillance cameras throughout the state that owned by homeowners, premises owners for buildings, whether they're commercial or retail, that one of the first things we do when we're retained on a case is to send out a letter to a property owner, whether it's commercial or residential, to preserve any video that may have been in existence on the day of the incident.
So let's give an example. Let's say, because many, people are renting their apartments and, they fall in front of the building, let's say, because there's a defective sidewalk or maybe there's dirt or debris that's left out on the steps. Usually there are cameras out there, cameras that are pointed somewhere in the vicinity where somebody falls. Am I correct?
Yeah, usually the cameras are there for security purposes to monitor the comings and goings of people in and out of the building, but they're also there to ensure that the workers are doing their job in maintaining the premises and keeping it safe.
Okay, so in a typical premises liability case, what is it that you usually have to prove to begin with, just to hold this landlord or a landlord responsible for an injury that occurs, let's say, outside or inside the building?
In order to establish negligence in a premises case, you have to show that the property owner or the person that's responsible to maintain the property either was notice of a condition or created a condition. Created the condition is usually a situation where, for instance, in a restaurant, a busboy or a server drops something on someone or drops something on the floor and someone falls. That employee created the condition that caused the incident. Notice is different. Property owner, we would have to show, was either on actual or constructive notice of the condition. Actual notice means that someone actually complained about it and told them there's something on the floor, please clean it, or you can show that an employee observed it.
Okay, so let's get into that restaurant right now. Somebody's, they're dining out, they're on their way to the bathroom, they take a slip and fall because a waiter or somebody dropped something and it had been there. We're not really sure, but we're hoping for the sake of the person who's bringing the lawsuit that it's been there for at least, 5-10 minutes or at least for somebody to be able to clean it up, and they didn't do that. And there's a camera in there, all right, because the restaurateur wants to make sure that no one's stealing anything, and there's a camera. What's the first thing you do as an attorney when somebody comes to you and says that they fell with respect to this restaurant?
First thing I want to know from the client is did they report the incident? Was the establishment on notice that the person was claiming they were injured in some fashion and that they were injured? That would show that the restaurant in this instance would be on notice of the potential for a claim. So that even without an attorney's letter asking them to preserve the video, the argument we would make is just the fact that they were on notice of the accident and on notice there was a potential for a claim, that they should preserve any video that was in existence on the day of the incident, because what happens often is that these videos are overrun after 1 to 2 weeks.
Now, is that standard in the industry? Or?
Pretty much.
It is.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say you get them that letter and you get it out immediately because the client's only seen you maybe 2 or 3 days after the accident, so hopefully they still have it. You send them the letter. Do you just send it regular mail? Do you certify the letter? I mean, how do you make sure that they got the letter?
We send the letter certified mail and regular mail with proof of mailing, because a lot of establishments will not accept certified mail any longer. So we take the extra step of putting a proof of mailing slip to show that the letter was sent.
All right, let's say that they do get the letter, but they accidentally delete the video. What happens next?
Well, what the letter is just an extra step that we take to ensure that the video is preserved. The video should be preserved even without the letter when they're on notice of the potential for a claim, but the letter really just puts the nail in the coffin, so to speak, to put the burden on them to preserve the video. I've had situations where defendants, once litigation starts, will respond and say, well, we're not in possession of video any longer. But the question becomes to us, we want to know, did you have video that was in existence on the date of the incident, or at the very least at the time that you received my letter asking you to preserve the video?
And what if the answer is, yes, we did, but sorry, we made a mistake?
Well,
It's all forgiven, but it's not all forgiven.
since videos have become an important part of the profession and the business for the reasons I've explained, the courts have been asked to evaluate these situations frequently. And what usually happens is, even if the video is destroyed by accident, it doesn't matter if it's intentional or by accident, then at the very least we'll be able to get a negative inference charge if the case goes to a jury, and the jury will be permitted to draw the greatest negative inference that the evidence allows due to the failure to preserve the video.
And that's commonly known as the spoliation of evidence, correct?
Yes.
All right. Do you find that when there is a spoliation of evidence, jurors seem to be a little bit more favorable in awarding monies to plaintiffs?
Sure, because the video would answer a lot of the questions that are often in dispute between a plaintiff and defendant in a lawsuit. A lot of times, the plaintiffs will claim that there was a substance there that shouldn't have been there, and the defendants will claim that the substance either wasn't there or they didn't have time to remedy the condition. And when we request the video be preserved, we don't just request that the video of the incident be preserved, we request the whole day of the video be preserved.
Why is that?
Because you could see whether anyone else had slipped in a particular area before, whether anyone had almost had a near-miss accident. You can also find out whether any employees of the premises owner had maintained the area or come by and cleaned it at any point in time. And you could also show how long a condition existed with the video.
Well, any tips, because you don't have too much more time, but if somebody's watching right now and they were involved in, say, a slip and fall in a restaurant or a trip and fall outside of a building, something, what advice would you give them? I mean, obviously, let's get to you, but what advice would you tell them fairly quickly after the accident?
The first thing is to make sure that the establishment knows that the person is claiming that they were injured, to be specific as to what you're claiming caused you to fall. I don't remember, I don't know, always works against you.
Right.
You have to be truthful, but if you did fall on an uneven walkway or a substance, it's important to let the owner know exactly what you're claiming happened to you.
And most importantly, where do we find you?
You can reach me at my office, 212-668-8400, and my website is grandellilaw.com.
And you'll come back, right?
Anytime.
All right.
Thank you.
Don't worry, we have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at today's verdict. Advertising and social media has become very popular. For some, it is a major source of income. But there are disclosure rules and contracts that need to be followed in an industry that is still evolving at a rapid pace. But no worries, Adam Weissman, he's here. Tell us all about it. Adam, this particular topic fascinates me because I know so little about it. But I know that my wife and many other people are constantly watching Instagram, and there's always products that seem to be in the background that they must be making money, else they wouldn't be putting these things on Instagram. So how does this work, by the way? How do people even make money from this?
Well, first off, we wouldn't call it watching Instagram. I think you might
All right, I'm
get
sorry.
you might
Okay.
get called out on that.
Well, you know, there are videos. She watches the videos.
True. She watches videos on Instagram. That's beside the point.
Okay, but you're right. It's whatever. Viewing Instagram. Tell me what's
So a lot of these people call them influencers, people who have a following, who have other viewers or other followers, Instagram users looking at them on a daily basis, are actually getting paid by a lot of companies out there who want them to advertise their services. So they'll set up a campaign, as we call it, where they will be provided a certain amount of money to make different kinds of posts.
All right, so let's say you have a particular individual who is showing, videos, or she's writing about her family, right? Children, whomever. And she happens to be drinking a particular soda. But she doesn't tell you that she's being paid to hold the soda in her left hand specifically, with it turned in a certain way so you know exactly the brand. False? Is that allowed? Can you do that?
It's not allowed.
It's not allowed.
And unfortunately, it's happening.
Okay.
Now, there's an entity out there, we call it the Federal Trade Commission. It's an independent agency created by the government. They've been around for about 100 years, but what they're trying to do now is step up their game and make sure that people on Instagram and people on other social media platforms are properly disclosing when they're being paid to advertise. So if you were to get paid, let's say, $10,000 to advertise Coke in a bunch of posts, and you don't say that you were paid or that you are somehow sponsored by Coke, you could potentially get in a lot of trouble.
Well, what kind of trouble?
You could get fines. You could have the FTC going after you, which has been happening in the past few years in increasing amounts.
All right, now, how do we get you? How do you come into this? Who do you represent?
I represent a lot of influencers individually, and I also represent a lot of the companies that manage these influencers, that are sort of the middle person in between the influencers and the brands that hire them.
So when you sit down with an influencer and you're going to represent them, do you negotiate the contracts between them and the particular social media platforms? Is it just between you and the influencer? How does it work, really?
It really depends on the relationship that the influencer has with either the brand or if they're working with a management group. Just like in traditional entertainment, they might be the middle person helping to negotiate. So it's really on a case-by-case basis.
All right, so now let's take it from the other side. Either Coca-Cola or a lipstick brand or somebody else wants to market that particular product. Do they usually reach out to the Instagram hosts, or how does it even work? How does a negotiation even work?
So it depends. You'll sometimes have giant brands actually directly reaching out to individuals, which to me is fascinating because if you look at traditional advertising, that sort of thing never happened. Yeah. You wouldn't just be some person walking on the street and Coke would say, hey, can you advertise this for us? But that is effectively happening in a lot of cases. It tends to happen to people with more followers because they're obviously more of a public figure. There's also a lot of agencies and a lot of management groups who are in touch directly with a lot of these brands, and they do facilitate a lot of those campaigns.
Now, I know we were talking about a little bit about the federal government and agencies that may get involved, but let's talk about maybe private lawsuits. Is there anything privately that can come in here that could really throw a monkey wrench in there? Will anybody sue an influencer privately for, I don't know, maybe taking a brand and using it and not paying? I don't know. You tell me.
So one of the big issues that came out around last year, there was a giant music festival called the Fire Festival. This was hosted out in the Caribbean, and there was a lot of hype. There were a lot of influencers involved, and to make a very long story short, the entire festival was a bust.
I remember there was a particular gentleman who, right, wasn't he putting this, he was going to be in charge of it, and it didn't really happen, and he got some trouble for that.
And a lot of individual influencers actually implicated in that, solely because they were advertising. Solely because they were people promoting this event. And then when people got to the event, they realized it was just a mess. It was an absolute mess.
All right, well, this field obviously is still growing.
Yes.
Are we going to see more regulation? Who regulates it? Is is New York State going to have a little piece of regulation here? Is it going to be just the federal government? Where's it going?
So the federal government's probably going to be the main point of regulation. They're increasing a lot of what they're doing these days. They're starting to look at influencer marketing more and more and starting to really crack down on some of the bigger campaigns that happen, some of the bigger companies that aren't disclosing properly with their influencers. And I wouldn't be shocked if you're going to start seeing a lot more private lawsuits like with the Fire Festival, like dealing with copyright issues and other disclosure pieces. It's harder to tell. It's hard to tell as the industry just keeps going.
I asked you this offset. I know it's a tough question, and again, you may not really know it, but like for instance, today's verdict, we have a Facebook page, or we put stuff on Twitter as well. Can somebody take that material and use it in their own Instagram posts or Instagram things just to boost their own views? And if not, who brings the lawsuit? Today's like, how does it really work when you're talking about social media infringement, really copyright infringement?
Yep.
So where's it going? Is what I'm asking you. Like what happens when content, there's a fine line as to what people realize they can or cannot take. I know of people who've actually used photographs from entities and have put them on their own sites. Are people really going after people for this?
They are. They are. And what's interesting about it is social media is so successful and so fantastic because it facilitates sharing between hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis. So it's created this sort of environment where sharing is rewarded, where if you're a photographer and somebody takes your photo and reposts it and they give you credit, you're probably going to want that. But that doesn't mean that they can take your photo and put it on their own website without your permission.
And not pay for it.
And especially not pay. So yes, there are a ton of lawsuits out there of people taking stuff off of social media, using it on their own website, using it in an advertising campaign, or even the worst I've seen is using it on their own product labels.
Okay, so let's say I'm an influencer, right?
Yep.
And I come to you and I'm ready to, start my own website to use today's verdict and start putting it every place. What's the first thing you tell me?
First thing I tell you is you're going to want to form some sort of corporate entity. You're going to want to create something that's going to shield yourself from liability because you're going to start putting yourself out there to the world. You want to make sure that if somebody doesn't like what you're doing or you accidentally do something wrong, you're protected a little bit.
Okay, and we're going to create some kind of contract.
Yes.
All right, and then once we have this particular contract, what's the next step? In other words, am I filling out anything else? Is this contract binding, or in other words, this contract is going to be just with Facebook, just with Twitter, just with Instagram? Do I need separate contracts to decide depending on where I'm going?
Well, chances are if you're coming to me, you've already signed up for all of these platforms. And just like myself, and I'm guessing yourself, I've signed a giant contract with Facebook and Instagram.
Right.
Everyone who uses it has signed a giant contract.
We've
with
used it. I
Yep.
mean, we've used it here. We've advertised through Facebook. We've advertised through Twitter. But you don't read the fine print.
You definitely don't. And to be frank, I didn't when I signed up years ago before I got into law school, I guess. But nobody does. Nobody reads it. Nobody really looks at it because the reality is you're not going to have a say to be able to push back on anything they have in there anyways.
Right.
So why bother?
Where do we find you?
You find me, best place would be at my website, www.adamweissmanlaw.com, or you can reach me on my direct line at 929-261-2320.
All right, and this field is just constantly evolving, so, I mean, we really love to have you back.
Love to be back.
All right. We have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Hang with us right after this.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Leschwell. Adopting a child is one of the greatest gifts you can give, but there is a long road before you're able to bring that child home. Here to tell us all about the adoption process is Clifford Greenberg. Clifford, if I'm mistaken, it is National Adoption Month.
I'm braceleted up. I had a foster care adoption this morning in Manhattan, and it's National
I
Adoption
mean,
Month.
I can't think of a better thing to do than
It's-
to adopt a child.
It's so wonderful, and no matter what kind of adoption you're doing, there's foster care, there's international, same-sex, private agency. It's the happy month.
But there are laws involved, and it's not
Yes.
so easy. All right, take us through the process. All right, let's say I was interested in adopting a child. Where do I even start? You don't open up the paper. Where do you even begin to decide I want to be a parent?
Foster care-wise, it's relatively easy. There are 26 foster care agencies left in New York City. You become a licensed certified foster parent, you go through training, you get a child or children to foster, and if they're legally freed for adoption, then you can adopt those children. More difficult is private. It takes a little bit longer. It's a lot more expensive. Foster care, not only don't you pay anybody, you get a subsidy every month in order to adopt children.
With respect to foster care, because we've had some guests on the show where there have unfortunately been some bad incidents that have happened in foster care. How do they screen? Let's say I want to be a foster care parent. What are they looking at? Is it just criminal background? Is it what I do for a living? I don't know. Religion? What do they look at?
It's a fair question. Definitely not religion, color, all that.
They don't look at that.
New York, absolutely, no doubt about it. But they take your last 28 years worth of addresses, and with those addresses, they send it up to Albany to screen you. Has anyone ever accused you or anyone 18 in your home, 18 years or older in your home, of neglect or abuse? That's one way. Then they do fingerprints. Were you ever arrested? Were you ever convicted of a crime? Then we take it from there. I've never not done an adoption because of somebody's what we call SCR neglect history or criminal history, but you have to explain it in the home study, which is done by the agency, and in a separate affidavit from my office.
How often do the foster care adoptions become permanent adoptions?
Foster care adoptions become permanent adoptions just per se. Fostering is temporary. So
So what you're saying is you may be a foster parent, and then the foster parent decides I want to adopt the child.
exactly. After a certain number of months, a child is in your home. The agency brings a proceeding to terminate parental rights of the birth mother or father or both, and then the child is freed for adoption.
But I assume once that happens, there's no more subsidy at this point.
There is a subsidy
There is,
until the child is 21 years old
Really?
after you adopt.
But it's funny because I wouldn't be that way in a private adoption. Would
It's
there
the
be?
exact opposite.
Right.
No subsidy. Foster care is wonderful, and you happen to get a subsidy.
get a subsidy also.
Private is equally wonderful. You're paying a lot of money to a lawyer or an agency, and no, you don't get a subsidy.
All right, let's
for
get
that.
into the private adoptions, all right? There was a time not too long ago that many people were looking for babies overseas. Is that still happening? Russia was very hot. Is that still?
It is. A bunch of places closed. China said, for example, and I'm being pejorative, if
That's
you're
okay.
too fat or if you're a same-sex couple, you can't adopt.
Why is that?
They can say what they want.
And do they do that?
As heinous as it is, they do. Other countries close. Guatemala used to have a lot of international adoptions. No longer. Russia,
Is it
same
a
thing.
political? Is it the political climate? What makes a particular country decide we're not really interested in letting you have so many of our children? at this
I would say
particular-
so. It is. And xenophobia, ethnocentricity, they say, hey, we don't want you to have our children. There are plenty of countries where you can adopt internationally. I get phone calls from somebody saying, I want to adopt my niece or nephew or somebody from another country. And those are doable, but it's just not as prevalent as it was in the old days.
What about countries that say, fine, I'll allow the adoption, but only to a Catholic family, only to a Jewish family, only to a family in Southern California? I mean, can they put those restrictions?
They can put restrictions that are reasonable or deemed unreasonable, like China did, and then people who wish to adopt from that country can go through whatever hoops they've put up.
Okay, this is a little bit of a sad issue, but I've heard of instances where people have adopted children and wanted to negate the adoption. In other words, they've actually said, this isn't working. This particular child came with certain social issues that I didn't know about, medical issues that we can't afford.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
I've gotten those phone calls.
You
Not
have.
my favorite phone
No, I
calls. How do I
can't.
undo the adoption?
Yes.
And I basically say, well, there are no give-backs. This is
can't
not a
give back a
horse.
child.
You can't give back a child. The only thing, and of course you recommend counseling, and you're very nice to someone because somebody's calling you in pain, maybe
So what do you do?
justifiably so. Other than recommending that they get services, which are mandated to be given to them in the foster care realm, the only thing, if they're absolutely adamant, is that a parent can legally place a child into foster care, which then starts a whole nother cycle.
All right. Tips. Someone's watching right now. Do they want to be a foster parent, private adoption? What do you recommend at this point, really?
Do it. It's an amazing, unbelievable journey. I've wrote a couple of books about it. I go
Should have
lecture
brought a book
about.
here. I would have liked to have taken a look at the book.
I'll bring it next time. It's actually there's one being published as we speak.
What's it called?
I See You, I See Me. Basically a story of love and how differences don't matter.
Does it seem with the, with the private adoptions that they take years? How long does it take?
You know, it could take years. It's a birth parent being matched up with a prospective adoptive parent. It could be quick. It could be slow. There are times when a birth parent does have time to change her mind, and it's a failed adoption.
You know, we really didn't get into surrogacy and issues of somebody, having a baby with somebody else's in vitro. And did you ever see any of those issues coming up in terms of adoption or foster care? Does that ever kind of cross?
Yeah, surrogacy is illegal if it's done in New York. There just is no New York surrogacy, but there are, if two dads, for example, are going elsewhere and the surrogate is carrying the baby, yes, that's doable.
Where do we get you?
My number is 212-822-1444. Email cliffg1013@gmail.
And go out and adopt a child.
Absolutely.
All right. That's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our three guests for joining us and, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there is a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time.